From what you might have guessed, from the generic title, I've recently felt some serious discontent when it comes to YouTube, and after countless hours of these thoughts swirling around in my head, I've been able to condense this platform's greatest failures in 10 unique headings. Perhaps the best way to start is to explain my history with the site, but viewers who want to jump right in can skip forward with the timestamps. For those who don't know, I've been making videos since the middle of 2016, where at the time, I was a university student who was procrastinating with Windows Movie Maker. The reason I use a text-to-speech voice is because I literally couldn't afford a mic when I first started, and when I grew enough to actually start earning money from the platform, the voice just became synonymous with the channel. Back when I started, the channel was mostly just gaming montages disguised as guides, which eventually expanded into light gaming news and general memes. However, at the start of 2019, I decided to branch off into news from the real world. I figured it would be a natural extension of what I was already making. It would serve as easy content to leave me free for other projects, and it would be a safe way to avoid the dreaded adpocalypse that was sweeping the platform at the time. Initially, I was mostly right. The weekly news videos were easy enough to produce in only a couple of days. They would be getting monetized around half the time, and it generated reasonable viewership for my channel size. However, over time, more people claimed to be using my videos as their sole source of world news. So with this in mind, I felt obliged to spend more time checking facts, doing my due diligence, and tackling more complex and intricate stories. As time went on, more and more news stories were getting demonetized, and as YouTube had more or less an entirely automated and ever-changing content review system, it was often impossible to know what exactly deemed a video unsafe for advertisers. These days, they can at least give you a broad and sweeping reason as for why a video was unsittable, but back then, they'd just tell you it didn't meet the mark, and that was it. By the middle of the year, none of my news content was getting monetized, but with what felt like a sense of purpose, I made them week after week until the end of the year, knowing that they wouldn't make a dime. Although arguably, the most popular series I had at the time, I thought the end of 2019 would spell the end for news on the channel, as it just didn't make sense to spend a combined 100 days a year working for free. After all, by this time, YouTube had become more or less my full-time job. Going into my last stretch of university, the series was fortunately saved with the help of a partnerships company called More Yellow, who was able to get regular sponsors for the show, as well as an uptick in Patreon supporters who wanted to keep the series going. By the start of 2020, the series became a monthly installment and started becoming longer and more ambitious in its length and content. Over that year, I was even able to hire a very talented editor to dramatically increase the production value, and a handful of writers to make that process easier. By the start of the following year, the news had well and truly cemented itself as a favorite of the channel, still not generating ad revenue, but making it work due to these other revenue streams. The real problem wasn't the revenue, but rather its visibility. As viewers may or may not know, content that covers tragedies or controversial topics are not deemed as safe for advertisers on YouTube, and as these two categories are basically the definition of world news, we obviously wouldn't be getting the news monetized anytime soon. However, although I could afford to make the series by going over YouTube's head, they had also lost any reason to recommend the news to new audiences, because after all, why recommend content that isn't going to generate revenue for the platform? By this time, the team was around 5 people strong, and the content itself was unrecognizable from what it once was. We learned a lot along the way, and we were able to tackle topics with the kind of confidence that I wouldn't have dreamed of covering back when the series started. However, despite this relentless push for quality and even an effort to create an unprofitable side series in an attempt to boost news in the algorithm, viewership was rapidly declining, and subscriber gain had become severely stagnated, as YouTube simply wasn't recommending this type of content to people who weren't already subscribed. Our business was news, a grey area we simply couldn't escape. even despite our efforts to remain unbiased in even the most controversial of topics, working for hundreds of hours a month just to be meeting our deadline within minutes of going live, and even solving our revenue issue. In spite of YouTube, I was still powerless against an algorithm that refused to recommend what we'd worked tirelessly to create. Without being recommended, the series can't increase viewership, it can't secure additional funding, and like all businesses, which aren't able to expand, it is destined to die. This sentiment came to a head after releasing a special news video on the Israel-Palestine conflict, which took 4 people 2 months to create, drew from hundreds of sources in 6 different languages, and had first-hand accounts from both civilians and armed combatants in the region. It's no secret that the team put their heart and soul into the project. However, just like the news, it wasn't being recommended. It was even briefly taken down for supposed breaches of the Violent Criminal Organizations policy, where I had to explain to YouTube that no one on the team were members of a terrorist organization. We weren't praising terrorism in any capacity and had provided enough context to justify the inclusion of some of our materials. When considering that the video covered a history of the region spanning 3,000 years, even before the formation of any such organization, it was safe to say that we did our homework. However, even though we were able to get the video back online, the damage was done, and instead of enjoying gains of several thousand subscribers a day before starting our news content, the entire month of July netted just 84 new subs. Knowing I could have just transitioned into generic Fortnite content instead of world news and be comfortable in my mansion right now, I couldn't help but feel defeated. The team pulled off a breakdown of maybe the most controversial and complex topic in modern history, with a 98.8% like ratio, doing the fucking impossible, but we still couldn't beat that godforsaken algorithm. I wanted to make a new series for people who didn't care about the news. I wanted to do something meaningful with an audience I was so lucky to have, and I wanted to create a reasonable source of information, which wasn't trying to make a billionaire richer, or turn one political group against another. In a world so divided, I wanted to make things better. This is where things stand at the moment, and it's why I wanted to make this critique in the first place. YouTube is a job I take very seriously. It's something that occupies the majority of my headspace. It's why I wake up in the morning, and it's usually what I'm thinking about as I drift off to sleep. It's changed my life in ways I could never have imagined, and given me what I consider to be the best job in the world. But even through all of this, I can't help but still harbor so much discontent for what it has become. With my backstory out of the way, let's finally jump into the list. The first point comes down to content prioritization, which is more or less self-explanatory. If you've ever clicked on the trending page, only to be met with a bunch of surprised faces and a title which more or less translates to "look how much money I have," then you'll probably know what I mean. Although it could be argued that this is simply the marketplace of ideas working as intended, it makes me particularly annoyed, as for every average Tonight Show rant that gets 4 million views, there are 1,000 super underrated smaller creators that are achieving way more with only a few hundred views to their name. It's just a shame to see so many incredible videos getting buried because newer creators didn't min-max their SEO or win the Reddit lottery. This more or less leads into my next point of conformity. Newer channels tend to succeed because of their innovative ideas or through formats that haven't been adopted by the larger players among the platform. New creators come in with fresh perspectives and without a profit motive or the need to maximize revenue for their livelihood. They tend to be much more focused on delivering good content as opposed to all the other min-maxing that the algorithm tends to like. However, as a creator gets bigger, video structure tends to shift in ways that don't necessarily benefit the quality of the content. All of a sudden, video length stretches to be more in line with revenue maximization. Thumbnails and titles start to over-exaggerate to attract more clicks, and the passion of making good content starts to come second to ticking the YouTube content checklist, because if you don't conform to maximize your own growth, someone else will. This also leads into the third point. Quality is determined by the algorithm. By this, I mean that from the perspective of a YouTube creator, the ideal video isn't necessarily the best video, but rather, the most efficient. The ideal time to spend on a video isn't the duration that produces the best content, but rather the most amount of views per hour of production, which in turn leads to lower quality overall. If 3 hours of work can produce a video that can pull 50,000 viewers, it doesn't make sense to spend 20 hours trying to make a video that pulls in double that amount. This isn't to say that this is inherently bad, as not every video needs to be a perfectly crafted James Cameron masterpiece. However, when you consider that it's often way more profitable to create 10 low quality videos as opposed to one S-tier offering, it makes you wonder how much gold is overlooked in the pursuit of coal. YouTube tends to favor consistency and a constant stream of uploads, which tends to really hurt labor-intensive channels such as animation or long-form opinion pieces, which are often some of the best content that this platform produces. Point 4 comes down to the hidden algorithm. YouTube's algorithm isn't consistent, it's not well understood, and it tends to change without warning. Topics that YouTube considers safe to cover have changed for both better and worse since I started on the platform in 2016, which sometimes opens up opportunities for new niches, but more often than not, it tends to tank the viewership of some of the platform's most talented creators. The channel, The Great War, is a perfect example. A team of historians and producers banding together to make a real-time breakdown of both world wars, free of charge, is an absolute gift to this platform. But looking at their viewership, and considering that YouTube often finds it hard to differentiate between educational content and videos that are just blatant extremism, and you begin to understand why the trending tab looks like a special level of hell. YouTube also tends to create features that compete with other platforms, but I can't think of a single time they haven't fucked up their implementation. The ability to stream on YouTube has been around for a lot longer than most people think. However, one of the biggest reasons it didn't catch on was because the people who started streaming on the platform had their subsequent viewership tanked, meaning for the longest time, no one would touch the stuff. Years later, YouTube would attempt to copy Twitter with the introduction of community posts, which once again, no one gave a shit about. That was until a creator by the name of the Spliffing Brit discovered that by making polls and spamming it with keywords, you could get more exposure overnight than a channel could generate in an entire year. Just another attempt at making their neglected features relevant by making them vital in the algorithm. Most recently, the platform has introduced Shorts, which is obviously an attempt to compete with TikTok, because if low effort content wasn't already incentivized enough, viewers can now enjoy it through a portrait aspect ratio. Historians of this time period are going to fucking hate this trend. This isn't even half of the hidden YouTube meta that influences how creators work. Changing a thumbnail a few hours after release can refresh the recommended feed and help a channel reach a wider audience, which in itself is fine, but it adds another step of optimization that isn't focused on just making better videos. In terms of being monetized with gray area content, it also used to be beneficial to simply not appeal a video in the first place, as although an automated demonetized video would receive less viewership, running the risk of manual reviewer confirming these suspicions would severely throttle views over its lifetime. When a video was sponsored, it was never a good idea to appeal the automated decision, because you'd potentially risk hurting the relationship with the brand that paid for an ad slot. Even today, people with gray area content are literally copyright striking their own videos because it's more profitable than just leaving it up to YouTube. In no fucking world is that a healthy creator ecosystem. The fifth point is that there's a clear bias for bullshit on the platform. A recent study conducted by Mozilla found that content deemed as either triggering or misinforming would generate around 70% more viewership, leading to researchers arguing that this kind of content is disproportionately recommended because it is so effectively able to drive clicks. Furthermore, content that was found to fall into a gray area, including, by definition, most news stories that cover tragic events, which is more or less all of the important ones, are seen to have their viewership artificially throttled by 70%. YouTube is a platform where bullshit and outrage has a 140% head start on actual news because driving clicks is more important than delivering the often uncomfortable reality of the world. YouTube is the kind of king to literally praise the jester and shoot the messenger. Number 6 are the fucking ads, because if you haven't noticed, holy fucking shit are there a lot on the platform. Double ads, mid-rolls, and fucking 30-second unskippable fuckers, all there to waste your fucking time. It's just an endless cycle of adding too many ads, forcing more people to use ad blockers, which forces whoever's left to suffer even more ads to make up the difference. The problem is that creators can't even do anything about this bullshit, because if your videos aren't packed with this garbage, YouTube will just recommend much more profitable videos that are. Don't even fucking start on newer creators that have ads on their videos without even receiving profit, because along with the platform already raising the bar way too high to break into YouTube, new people also need to know that they're getting milked for the privilege of making free content for one of the biggest tech companies in the world. On top of this, YouTube has the fucking nerve to fix a problem they created by suggesting that viewers buy a subscription to YouTube Premium for an ad-free experience. On paper, it's actually not such a bad idea to offer such a service, but for a more expensive price tag than nearly any other streaming platform on the market, it's a fucking insult. Which leads quite nicely to number 7, revenue sharing and revenue streams. Viewers might not know the extent of YouTube's cut of the profits, but for the privilege of being hosted on their platform, creators can expect to pay YouTube a 45% commission on their work, and after demonetization, royalties, and networks getting their piece, creators will take whatever is left over. This is where other revenue streams, like Patreon or merchandise comes in, to supplement the often unreliable ad revenue from YouTube. But as previously mentioned, the platform loves to copy their competitors in disappointing ways. YouTube introduced features such as Super Chats and YouTube membership, allowing users to directly donate to their favorite creators, if they so choose. However, as you might imagine, this isn't for creators at all, as YouTube was still taking 30% of the revenue, meaning it was just a worse version of Patreon, integrated into the platform. These motherfuckers would fuck up making cereal, if given a chance. Speaking of 30%, we now get into what I like to call the 30% rule. Around 30% of a video's viewership is because of the content itself, while another 30 is for the thumbnail, another is for the title, and the rest is down to the alignment of the stars. Although having good content certainly helps, at the end of the day, it isn't at all why a person clicks on a video in the first place. Perhaps this is another old man yells at cloud moment for me personally, because I fucking hate the culture of loud and clickbaity channels to start with, but it seems to loop back into that problem of conformity, where uniqueness gets ever so slowly rooted out in a Darwinian scramble to the top of the algorithm. Next up is YouTube's content guidelines. I'm not about to go on about free speech, because as far as I'm concerned, as long as a person isn't presenting bullshit and pretending it's news, or trying to convince their audience that one ethnicity is inherently bad, then for the most part, people should be able to say what they want. Content guidelines should be a way to become monetized on the platform, as perhaps this is an unpopular opinion, but I don't really give a shit if YouTube refuses to put ads on gray area content, because creators are in one way or another able to work around that problem. However, they aren't able to get around an algorithm that refuses to pick them up for being less profitable, and that's where these compromises tend to fall apart. Perhaps the worst part about YouTube's guidelines, aside from its laughable broadness and inconsistency, is that although YouTube has the technology to detect that a video is unsuitable, it refuses to give any level of detailed analysis of what's wrong with a particular creation. As a channel that makes news content, pretty much everything we make could come under one policy or another, but without a breakdown of what we can change, there is no way for us to effectively make a news video that is both true to our intentions and safe for YouTube's guidelines. It's just not possible. The last point of today, and perhaps the greatest cardinal sin of them all, is YouTube's platform audience disconnect. I'm not just talking about the fucking YouTube rewinds that break records for the most amount of dislikes on their own platform, but for shit you might not even know about. In April of this year, CEO of YouTube, Susan Wojcicki, received a Free Expression Award from the Freedom Forum Institute, which in itself is insulting enough, But when you consider that the entire ceremony was primarily sponsored by YouTube itself, the whole thing just looks like that photo of Obama awarding himself a medal. The fact that these arrogant motherfuckers suppress genuine well-meaning content from thousands of creators for not being profitable, and at the same time, actively promote and monetize the easily disproven bullshit of others, just makes me believe that somewhere along the way, they might have actually started believing their own high-roading bullshit. YouTube has given me what I consider to be the greatest job in the world, and I'll forever cherish the opportunity to have so many people appreciate what I make. But even after giving me perhaps the greatest gift I've ever received, I still find it difficult to have a single shred of respect for YouTube and its laughable attempts to be seen as anything even remotely worthy of admiration.